"Are you lost too, mister?" The question sliced through Frederick's carefully constructed walls with the precision of a child's unguarded honesty. He looked up from his encrypted phone, where numbers representing his latest shipment blinked in coded sequence, and found himself staring into wide brown eyes that shouldn't trust strangers. She stood there in the quiet corner of Terminal B, backpack straps cutting into small shoulders, head tilted with curiosity. The airport chaos continued its symphony around them, announcements echoing off glass walls, rolling suitcases creating percussion against tile, travelers rushing toward gates with the desperation of people afraid of missing their lives. But in this space near the floor-to-ceiling windows where snow danced in swirling patterns outside, time seemed to pause for consideration. Frederick's thumb hovered over the send button that would confirm the Chicago deal, $3 million in untraceable cryptocurrency waiting. The girl shifted her weight from foot to foot, a small movement that reminded Frederick of his daughter Sophia's nervous habit when she wanted something but didn't want to seem demanding. This child wore purple sneakers with fraying laces and jeans that had been carefully patched at both knees with fabric that didn't quite match. Her jacket looked warm enough, but carried the telltale signs of being purchased secondhand. Good quality from years ago, now softened by multiple owners. "My mommy went to the bathroom," she continued, when Frederick didn't immediately respond, her voice carrying matter-of-fact acceptance rather than fear. "She said to wait right by the big window, but that was a really long time ago, I think. I counted to 103 times and she still didn't come back." She swung her backpack around and unzipped it with unself-conscious efficiency. Frederick's security detail, positioned at strategic points throughout the terminal, had certainly noticed this interaction by now. Marco would be watching through sunglasses that hid tactical assessment, calculating whether this was genuine accident or elaborate setup. In Frederick's world, children had been used as bait before, innocent faces hiding recording devices, trained to ask questions that would incriminate. But something in this girl's absolute lack of performance convinced him this was exactly what it appeared to be. She pulled a granola bar from her backpack, already half-eaten, wrapped back up in its foil with careful precision. "Are you hungry?" Mommy says when people sit alone for a long time staring at phones, they forget to take care of themselves. The girl extended the bar toward him with complete seriousness, as if offering half her provisions was standard protocol. Her generosity carried the weight of someone who understood scarcity, but chose kindness anyway. Frederick felt something he hadn't experienced in 5 years, the particular weight of being seen by someone who looked without agenda. His daughter saw him as daddy, infallible and protective. His organization saw him as boss, calculating and untouchable. Law enforcement saw him as target, slippery and dangerous. But this child saw him simply as another lost person who might need a granola bar. "I'm Frederick," he heard himself say, words emerging without the usual careful consideration his survival had long required. He didn't take the granola bar, but found himself shifting his position on the uncomfortable airport seat, making space beside him an implicit invitation. The girl climbed up without hesitation, settling in as if they'd been acquainted for years, rather than 90 seconds. Her small legs swung well above the floor with the contentment of someone whose immediate needs were met. "I'm Kylie," she announced, taking a bite of her reclaimed granola bar with satisfaction. "That's Kylie because Mommy wanted a name that meant beautiful in some language but spelled different than everyone else's. She picks special spellings for things because she says words are important, and how you arrange them matters." The explanation came with the practiced rhythm of something she'd repeated many times to teachers and friends. Frederick glanced at his phone where the deal timer continued its countdown. 13 minutes remained to confirm, or the buyers would move to their backup supplier, $3 million disappearing into someone else's accounts. He'd spent 2 months setting up this particular transaction through layers of cryptocurrency wallets and shell companies that would take federal investigators years to untangle. Missing the window meant starting over with explanations nobody wanted to hear, but his finger didn't move toward the phone. Instead, he found himself studying Kylie's profile as she swung her legs and hummed something off-key, completely comfortable in her temporary situation. She had the kind of unself-conscious presence his daughter had started losing lately, that absolute certainty that adults existed primarily to solve problems. Something about that trust, still intact, despite patched jeans and carefully preserved granola bars, struck him as both miraculous and dangerous. "Your mom's probably still looking for you," Frederick offered, the words emerging more gently than his usual clipped business tone. "These terminals are big, easy to get turned around." He was already calculating sightlines and bathroom locations, the tactical part of his brain that never fully disengaged, mapping the most efficient search pattern. Terminal B had 3 bathroom clusters, 2 Starbucks locations, multiple gate waiting areas that could all look similar. Kylie nodded with the wisdom of someone who'd given this considerable thought. Mommy gets really focused when she's thinking about her stories. Sometimes she doesn't hear me the first 3 times I say something, because she's watching the people around us and making up backgrounds for them. She gestured toward the crowded terminal with her granola bar, encompassing dozens of travelers in various states of stress. Her casual observation revealed training and awareness that seemed unusual for a 5-year-old. Frederick followed her gesture and felt ice slide down his spine. The man she'd indicated was carrying himself wrong for his briefcase size, shoulders compensating for weight distribution that didn't match the bag's appearance. It was exactly the kind of tell Frederick's people were trained to spot, the subtle wrongness that indicated concealed weapons or drugs or cash. This 5-year-old had just identified a potential threat with the casual observation of someone pointing out an interesting bird. "Your mom taught you to notice things like that?" he asked carefully, his hand moving subtly toward his phone, not to confirm the deal, but to text Marco a target description. In Frederick's experience, children didn't develop tactical awareness accidentally. Either they were trained deliberately, or they learned it through necessity, growing up in environments where observation meant survival. Both possibilities made him want to find this Athena woman immediately and determine what kind of danger orbited her family. "Mommy notices everything," Kylie said with clear pride, finishing the last bite of granola bar and folding the wrapper into a tiny square with meticulous care. "She says writers have to be professional observers of human nature, which means watching people and understanding why they do things. She writes romance books about people finding each other when they thought they'd be alone forever." The explanation came with the particular intonation of someone quoting beloved phrases they'd heard many times during bedtime stories. Frederick's phone buzzed with Marco's response. "Target acquired. 3 potential associates positioned at gates C7 and C12. Recommend extraction to secure location." Standard procedure when unidentified threats appeared in Frederick's vicinity was immediate tactical withdrawal, getting him out of potential crossfire before situations could develop. But extraction meant leaving this child alone again, abandoning her to wait for a mother who may have gotten genuinely lost or encountered various dangers. The loudspeaker crackled to life with another boarding announcement, and Kylie's attention shifted toward it with the particular alertness of someone listening for specific information. "We're supposed to go to San Francisco today," she offered conversationally, as if discussing plans for an afternoon rather than cross-country relocation. "Mommy has a meeting with someone who might want to publish her book about second chances. She's been working on it for 2 years between her shifts." Kylie swung her legs in rhythm with some internal song, occasionally humming fragments of melody that Frederick almost recognized from Sophia's playlist. The casual comfort she displayed sitting beside a stranger should have alarmed him on principle. His own daughter had received countless lectures about talking to unfamiliar adults. Yet something in Kylie's manner suggested this wasn't naivety, but rather a different kind of wisdom. The understanding that danger wore many faces. Politeness toward a sitting man in an airport terminal wasn't automatically among them. "Do you have kids?" Kylie asked suddenly, turning to study Frederick with the direct assessment children employed before social conditioning taught them that staring was rude. Her eyes moved across his face with careful attention, reading something in his expression that adults might have missed. "You have the look my friend Emma's dad gets when he watches her on the playground, like you're seeing someone else who isn't there but you wish they were." The accuracy of that observation knocked the breath from Frederick's lungs with more force than any physical blow had managed in his carefully violent life. He did have that look, caught it sometimes in mirrors when thoughts drifted to Sophia spending another evening with nannies and bodyguards, the guilt of absent parenting despite physical proximity, of being simultaneously present and fundamentally unavailable, manifested in exactly the kind of watching Kylie had identified with uncomfortable precision. "I have a daughter," Frederick admitted, the words coming easier than expected in the face of such direct curiosity. "She's about your age, at home with people who take care of her while I travel for work." The sanitized version of his life omitted the armed security detail that surrounded Sophia's every movement, the panic room built into her bedroom, the escape protocols she'd learned alongside her ABCs, because being Frederick Castellano's daughter meant being a potential target every moment. Kylie's face brightened with the particular joy of discovering common ground. "What's her name? Does she like animals?" "I really want a dog, but Mommy says we can't have one until we live somewhere that allows pets and we can afford the veterinarian bills." The cascade of questions came without pause between them, natural enthusiasm of a child discovering a new acquaintance who might become significant. She pulled her backpack onto her lap again. "Sophia," Frederick provided, finding himself unexpectedly willing to share details he normally guarded with operational security protocols. "She likes horses, has riding lessons twice a week." He didn't mention the armed escort that accompanied Sophia to those lessons, or that the stable owner had been thoroughly vetted and received quarterly payments ensuring absolute discretion. In Kylie's world of granola bars and patched jeans, horse riding lessons probably seemed impossibly luxurious. "Horses are basically big dogs," Kylie declared with the confident logic of childhood reasoning. "Emma's mom says rich people have horses instead of pets because they can, but I think horses probably give good hugs if you could reach their necks." She hugged her one-eared rabbit demonstratively, showing Frederick the proper technique. "Mr. Flops here is an excellent hugger even though his ear came off when we had to move really fast from our old apartment." The casual mention of moving really fast triggered Frederick's threat assessment instincts again. People moved fast for two primary reasons: pursuing opportunities or escaping dangers. Combined with Athena's apparent hypervigilance about observing suspicious behavior and teaching her daughter awareness skills, the picture forming in Frederick's mind suggested a woman running from something. Ex-husband, maybe, or bad relationship that ended badly, fleeing across state lines to San Francisco where publisher meetings provided legitimate cover. Frederick's phone buzzed again. Marco reporting bathroom sweeps coming up empty. No woman matching basic description, frantically searching. That absence of immediate discovery shifted the situation from temporarily lost to potentially problematic. Airport security would get involved soon if they hadn't already. Social services protocols activating whenever unaccompanied minors appeared without clear guardian proximity. The machinery of official intervention would separate Kylie from her mother through bureaucratic necessity, creating exactly the kind of documented crisis that people running couldn't afford. "How long ago did your mom go to the bathroom?" Frederick asked, keeping his tone casual despite the tactical calculations running through his mind. He needed to establish timeline, determine at what point this shifted from minor separation to actual emergency requiring his more extensive resources. Resources that would expose his presence to airport security systems, creating records Frederick usually avoided generating. But some situations demanded visibility regardless of personal preference for shadows. Kylie's face scrunched in concentration, small fingers counting something invisible in the air between them. "I'm not good with clock numbers yet, but it was before the big airplane landed that everyone was watching through the window. The really huge one that Mommy said was coming from somewhere across the ocean." She pointed toward the tarmac where an Airbus A380 now sat at its gate. "So, maybe a lot of minutes?" More than counting to 103 times. Frederick checked his watch and calculated backwards from the A380's arrival time listed on his phone. That flight had landed 47 minutes ago. 47 minutes was well beyond the threshold of bathroom stop, plus general disorientation. 47 minutes meant something had gone meaningfully wrong, some obstacle beyond simple navigation confusion. Locked stall, maybe? Medical emergency? Security detention for suspicious behavior? Or the darker possibilities Frederick's profession forced him to consider. "Okay," Frederick said, making a decision that would complicate his carefully scheduled day, but felt non-negotiable in ways he didn't examine too closely. "Let's go find your mom. Can't have you counting to 104 times." He stood, expecting Kylie to slide down from the chair and follow, but instead she remained seated, studying him with new intensity. Her expression had shifted into something more assessing, less innocent. "You're not a normal mister," Kylie said slowly, her voice carrying consideration rather than accusation. "You sit like Emma's dad after he came back from the war, watching all the doors and windows even when you're looking at your phone, and those other misters over there." She gestured vaguely toward where Marco maintained his position. "They watch you the way Mommy watches me on the playground, making sure nothing bad happens but trying not to be obvious." The kid was terrifyingly perceptive, identifying protective detail through pure behavioral observation, despite Marco's professional-grade subtlety. Frederick reassessed his assumptions about Kylie's innocence versus trained awareness, wondering exactly what kind of life had taught a 5-year-old to spot security patterns most adults never noticed. The implications circled back to questions about Athena's background, what dangers she might be escaping, whether approaching airport security could expose this family to worse problems than temporary separation. "I'm someone who solves problems," Frederick offered carefully, the phrase he used when legitimate business contacts asked about his work, without wanting specific details that might implicate them. The people watching are friends who help me do that. And right now, the problem to solve is finding your mom before you have to count to 100 any more times. He extended his hand toward her, palm up, an invitation rather than command. Kylie regarded his hand for 3 long seconds, then placed her small fingers in his palm with the decisive commitment of someone who'd made a calculated choice. Okay, problem solver, Mr. Frederick. But we have to find her fast because she gets really scared when she can't see me. After our last apartment when the bad things happened, she doesn't like it when we're separated. She hopped down from the chair, backpack secured, one-eared rabbit clutched under her free arm. Frederick felt the weight of her hand in his, light, trusting, completely vulnerable, and experienced an unfamiliar sensation in his chest that might have been protective instinct, or might have been fear. This child had just voluntarily placed herself in the custody of a man who'd ordered executions, whose legitimate business served primarily as money laundering for operations spanning 4 states. Yet here he was, hand gently holding Kylie's, preparing to navigate airport bureaucracy to reunite her with a mother who sounded increasingly dangerous herself. The central corridor of Terminal B pulsed with the particular chaos airports generated during winter travel delays, hundreds of people compressed into space designed for smooth flow, now converted into impromptu camping situations complete with sleeping bags. Frederick navigated through the crowd with the efficient movement of someone accustomed to moving through hostile territory, his body creating a path that Kylie followed in his wake. Marco and the other detail members shifted position to maintain coverage, their presence invisible to casual observers. Kylie maintained running commentary as they walked, her small voice providing observations that continued to demonstrate uncomfortable perceptiveness about human behavior. That lady there is crying but trying to hide it. See how she keeps touching her phone like she's texting but the screen isn't lit up? Mommy does that when she's upset about rejections from publishers, but doesn't want me to worry. The ability to read emotional states through physical tells suggested either natural empathy or learned skill from environments where reading moods meant safety. They passed a Starbucks where lines snaked 15 deep with travelers desperate for caffeine and normalcy, the familiar corporate comfort of overpriced coffee drinks that tasted identical in every city. Frederick considered stopping to ask staff if they'd seen a frantic woman searching for her child, but the crowd density made that inefficient compared to continuing toward the information desk. Still, he filed away the location mentally. Athena might have stopped there if she was searching systematically through terminal businesses. Do you solve problems for good people or bad people? Kylie asked suddenly, her question cutting through the ambient noise with uncomfortable directness. She looked up at him while walking, forcing Frederick to watch where they were going for both of them, trusting his guidance completely while interrogating his character. Mommy says you can tell a lot about someone by who they choose to help. Heroes help people who can't protect themselves. Villains help people who hurt others. The question deserved honesty, even if complete truth would horrify this trusting child. I help people who pay me, Frederick answered carefully, threading between deception and inappropriate revelation. Sometimes those people are good, sometimes they're complicated. Mostly they're people in situations where normal solutions don't work. It was the closest he'd come to acknowledging that his client base consisted primarily of criminals requiring specialized services, protection, transport, enforcement, consultation on matters too delicate for legal channels. Kylie absorbed this with serious consideration, her small face working through moral mathematics beyond her years. Mommy says everyone does bad things sometimes when they're scared or desperate, but what matters is whether you're trying to be better or trying to justify staying bad. People who want to be better are worth helping even when they mess up. The philosophical framework she presented came clearly from maternal instruction. Athena's worldview transmitted through bedtime conversations and teachable moments. The information desk materialized ahead, its illuminated sign promising assistance for travelers in various forms of distress. A young woman in airline uniform managed the counter with the practiced weariness of someone who'd spent the day fielding questions about delays and lost luggage, her smile maintained through obvious exhaustion. Frederick approached with Kylie still attached to his hand, aware of how they must appear. Expensive suit beside patched jeans, designer watch beside plastic digital one. "Excuse me," Frederick began, his voice carrying the particular authority that made service workers immediately attentive, despite long lines of other desperate travelers. "This young lady has been separated from her mother for approximately 50 minutes. Mother's name is Athena. They were headed to San Francisco. He provided the basic details without editorial, keeping his tone professional, the kind of concerned citizen assisting a child, rather than someone with personal investment. The desk agent's expression shifted from customer service routine to genuine concern, her training for exactly this scenario clearly activating. "Oh, honey," she addressed Kylie directly, bending slightly to achieve eye level. "Have you been alone this whole time? Did a nice man help you find me?" The question embedded assumptions about Frederick's role, helpful stranger doing his civic duty, but also carried subtle assessment, evaluating whether his presence represented solution or problem. "I wasn't alone. I was waiting where Mommy told me," Kylie corrected with precision. "Then I found Mr. Frederick, and he said he'd help me find her because he has a daughter too, and understands about worrying." Her explanation positioned Frederick as fellow parent rather than random stranger, instinctively providing information that would make the desk agent less suspicious of a well-dressed man holding hands with an unrelated child in an airport. The agent nodded, already typing into her computer system, generating the report that would trigger security protocols and public announcements. "Let me get your information and we'll page your mother immediately. I'm sure she's been looking everywhere for you." Her fingers moved rapidly across the keyboard, professional efficiency taking over. "Can you tell me your full name, sweetie? And your mom's full name?" Frederick felt Kylie's hand tighten fractionally in his at the request for full names, that small physical tell revealing anxiety despite her calm exterior. The hesitation lasted only a heartbeat before she provided the information. Kylie Athena Morrison. But that tiny pause confirmed Frederick's suspicions about active avoidance of documentation. Women escaping dangerous situations often changed names, or at least became intensely private about sharing identifying details, teaching their children similar caution. "And you, sir?" The agent turned her attention to Frederick, pen poised above a form that would require his information as the reporting party. "I'll need your name and contact information for our records. Standard procedure when minors are involved." Her tone remained professional but firm, the kind of bureaucratic requirement that couldn't be circumvented regardless of discomfort with official documentation. Frederick's name would go into airport security systems, cross-referenced against various databases. Marco's voice crackled through the nearly invisible earpiece Frederick wore, too quiet for anyone else to hear but clear as conversation to him. "Boss, advise redirect. Your name in their system creates complications we discussed avoiding this quarter." Sound tactical advice, given the ongoing federal investigation that hadn't yet accumulated enough evidence for indictment, but certainly maintained active surveillance on Frederick's movements. Helping a lost child was admirable, but documentation linking him to any civilian situation created potential leverage. Frederick met the desk agent's expectant gaze and made his decision in the space between heartbeats. "Frederick Castellano," he provided clearly, watching her expression for recognition of the name that appeared periodically in business sections and occasionally in crime coverage careful enough to avoid defamation. "Castellano Security Solutions, Chicago." He pulled a business card from his wallet, the legitimate company information, office number that connected to actual receptionists, and placed it on her desk. The agent accepted the card with professional courtesy, entering his information into her system without visible reaction to his name. Either she didn't recognize it, or had been trained not to show recognition when processing reports involving individuals of interest. "Thank you, Mr. Castellano. We'll issue an immediate page for Athena Morrison and alert our security team to be on lookout." She handed Kylie a small stuffed airplane toy from a drawer behind the desk. "You were very brave, sweetie." Kylie accepted the toy with polite gratitude, adding it to her collection alongside one-eared Mr. Flops in her backpack. "Thank you, but I wasn't scared because I found Mr. Frederick, and he wasn't really lost either, just sitting in the wrong place until I helped him find the right one." Her interpretation of their encounter carried the particular wisdom children sometimes accessed, seeing truth adults worked hard to avoid. Frederick hadn't been lost geographically, but the word fit, in ways that made his chest tight again. The overhead speakers crackled to life moments later with the announcement Frederick had committed them to. "Athena Morrison, please come to the information desk in Terminal B. Your daughter Kylie is waiting for you at the information desk in Terminal B." The message repeated twice, echoing through the vast space, reaching into bathrooms and restaurants and gate lounges where a frantic mother might be searching. Frederick felt Kylie's hand relax slightly in his, relief evident, even though her expression remained calm. They waited near the information desk while the announcement echoed through the terminal. Kylie's small body pressed against Frederick's leg in a way that suggested she was less calm than her face indicated. Frederick checked his watch, 53 minutes now since Athena had disappeared into a bathroom, crossing into territory where innocent explanations became less probable. The desk agent kept glancing at them with the particular concern of someone trained to spot signs of trafficking or abduction, her suspicion barely masked by professional courtesy. "Do you think something bad happened to her?" Kylie asked quietly, her voice losing some of its earlier confidence. "Like at our old apartment when the police cars came and Mommy made me hide in the closet with headphones on?" The question revealed another fragment of their history, another piece of the puzzle Frederick was assembling about what Athena Morrison was running from. Police involvement suggested domestic violence or criminal activity, either as victim or witness to something that required protective relocation. Frederick knelt down to Kylie's eye level, a gesture that felt foreign to someone who spent most of his time towering over subordinates and competitors. "Your mom is probably fine. Airports are confusing, and bathrooms sometimes have long lines or broken locks." He kept his voice steady, projecting certainty he didn't entirely feel. The tactical part of his mind was already running through darker scenarios: medical emergency, security detention, targeted abduction by whoever they'd fled from. "She has diabetes," Kylie offered suddenly, the information tumbling out with the urgency of someone who'd just remembered something important. "Sometimes her sugar gets too low, and she gets confused and shaky. She always carries candy in her purse, but sometimes she forgets to eat it when she's stressed." The medical detail shifted Frederick's assessment again, adding a whole new category of potential crisis to the situation. Low blood sugar could explain disorientation, inability to navigate back. Frederick stood immediately, turning back to the desk agent with new information that needed to be escalated. "The mother is diabetic. Possible medical emergency involving low blood sugar and disorientation." His tone carried command authority now, the voice he used when situations required immediate action from people who might otherwise move slowly through bureaucratic procedures. The agent's expression shifted from routine concern to active alarm, her fingers already reaching for the phone. "Medical team is being dispatched to check all bathroom facilities in Terminal B," the agent relayed after a rapid conversation with security coordination. "We're also reviewing security footage to track her last known location." She pulled out a tablet, pulling up camera feeds with the efficiency of someone who'd managed crisis situations before. Frederick positioned himself to see the screen, while keeping Kylie close, not wanting her to witness anything potentially traumatic. Marco appeared at Frederick's elbow, his presence sudden but not surprising given the escalating situation. "Boss, we've got eyes on 3 bathroom locations. Want me to coordinate a physical sweep?" His voice stayed low, professional, the kind of discreet offer of resources that wouldn't draw attention. Frederick nodded once, appreciating the initiative while recognizing that deploying his security team for civilian rescue created exposure he'd normally avoid. The tablet screen flickered through various camera angles, corridors, gate areas, restaurant entrances, as the agent searched for footage of a woman matching Athena's description. Kylie pressed closer to Frederick, standing on tiptoe to try to see, her small hand gripping his jacket with intensity. "She was wearing a blue sweater," Kylie provided helpfully. "The one with the small hole in the sleeve she keeps meaning to fix but never has time." "There," the agent said suddenly, freezing the footage on a timestamp from 49 minutes earlier. A woman in a blue sweater moved through frame heading toward the restroom corridor, her gait slightly unsteady, one hand trailing along the wall. Even from the grainy security footage, Frederick could see the signs Kylie had described: confusion, physical instability, someone whose body chemistry had gone dangerously wrong. The woman carried herself with the determination of someone trying to reach safety before collapse. "She's hypoglycemic," Frederick stated with certainty, recognizing symptoms from one of his accountants who'd had a similar episode during a tense negotiation. She knew something was wrong, and was trying to get somewhere private before it got worse. He understood that impulse, the need to hide vulnerability, to not let others see you weak, to maintain control even as your body betrayed you. It was the same instinct that had driven him to sit alone in terminals handling million-dollar deals while his daughter ate dinner with hired help. The desk agent was already coordinating with medical response over her headset, relaying the footage, timestamp, and location. "Medical team is converging on that restroom corridor now. They're equipped with glucose treatments." Her professionalism remained intact, but Frederick could hear the urgency underneath. Hypoglycemia could progress from confusion to unconsciousness, to seizures to death, if left untreated, the timeline compressed and unforgiving. Every minute Athena had spent trapped in that state increased the danger. Kylie's breathing had gone shallow, her small body trembling against Frederick's leg, despite her attempt to maintain the brave face she'd shown throughout this ordeal. Is Mommy going to die like Daddy did? The question came out small and broken, revealing a grief Frederick hadn't known existed, another layer of loss this child carried. Her father was dead, her mother potentially dying, and she'd placed all her trust in a stranger who solved problems with violence. Frederick picked Kylie up without thinking, something he hadn't done with Sophia in months because she'd declared herself too big for carrying. Kylie wrapped her arms around his neck and buried her face against his shoulder, finally letting herself be the scared child she'd been hiding beneath brave observations and careful questions. Her small body shook with silent sobs that felt like indictments of every moment Frederick had chosen business over being present for his own daughter. "Your mom is going to be fine," Frederick said into Kylie's hair, the promise carrying weight he had no authority to guarantee, but made anyway. "The medical people know exactly what to do. She probably just needs some juice and a few minutes to feel better." He rubbed small circles on her back, the way he vaguely remembered his own mother doing before she'd died, and left him to navigate the world alone at 16. Marco's voice came through the earpiece again. "Medical team has located the subject. Female, early 30s, unresponsive in restroom stall, administering glucose gel now." The clinical description of Athena Morrison, reduced to subject and female in tactical communication, made Frederick's jaw tighten. This was someone's mother, someone's whole world, the person who'd taught Kylie about kindness and observation, and choosing to help people even when you had nothing to give. "They found her," Frederick told Kylie gently, feeling her body go rigid with hope and fear. "The doctors are helping her right now. She was in the bathroom and got sick, but they're giving her medicine." He kept his explanation simple, age-appropriate, stripping away the medical terminology that would mean nothing to a 5-year-old. What mattered was that Mommy had been found, that help had arrived, that the nightmare of abandonment wasn't actually abandonment at all. The agent's headset crackled with updates that Frederick could partially hear. Patient responding to treatment, consciousness returning, requesting her daughter. "They're bringing her here," the agent confirmed with visible relief. "She's conscious and stable." Asking for Kylie. The reunion was minutes away now, the crisis resolving into the kind of outcome that didn't always happen in situations involving medical emergencies and missing parents. Kylie lifted her head from Frederick's shoulder, her face blotchy and wet, but hope blazing in her eyes. "Can I see her now? Is she coming?" The desperate need in her voice reminded Frederick that children weren't built to handle the uncertainty of possibly losing parents. They needed the security of knowing their world would remain intact, that the people who loved them would keep showing up. It was the kind of security he'd failed to provide Sophia, always one emergency away from disappearing. "She's coming," Frederick confirmed, setting Kylie back on her feet but keeping his hand on her shoulder. "You'll see her in just a minute." He scanned the corridor leading from the medical response area, watching for the gurney or wheelchair that would carry Athena Morrison back to her daughter. Marco had repositioned closer to the restroom corridor, providing overwatch for the medical team's approach, treating the civilian emergency with the same tactical precision as protecting Frederick from actual threats. The crowd parted, and a wheelchair emerged, pushed by a paramedic in uniform. A woman with dark hair and exhausted eyes slumped in the seat with an IV bag attached to a portable pole. Even from a distance, Frederick could see the resemblance. Kylie's eyes and chin, the same tilt of head, the way her hands moved restlessly despite obvious weakness. Athena Morrison looked exactly like someone who'd been fighting impossible odds for so long that even her body had started to rebel. Athena's eyes found Kylie across the terminal chaos, and something broke in her expression. Relief and guilt and love all cascading together into tears that she didn't try to hide. "Baby!" she called out, her voice hoarse and unsteady, arms reaching even though the paramedic was still wheeling her forward. The raw emotion in that single word made Frederick's chest constrict, because he recognized it. The particular terror of almost losing what mattered most, of failing to protect the one person who depended on you completely. Kylie ran, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders, Mr. Flops's remaining ear flopping with each step, all her careful composure finally shattering into the desperate need to reach her mother. She crashed into Athena's lap with enough force to make the wheelchair rock, small arms wrapping around her mother's neck with the fierce grip of someone who'd convinced themselves they might never get this moment. Athena held her daughter like she was trying to merge their bodies back into one, face buried in Kylie's hair. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry," Athena repeated like a prayer or confession, the words muffled against Kylie's head, but audible to everyone watching this reunion. I felt it happening and I thought I could make it back. But the bathroom was so far and then I couldn't remember which gate, couldn't remember which direction. The explanation tumbled out between sobs, the guilt of a mother who'd let her body's failure put her child at risk. Frederick stood back from the reunion, giving them space while the paramedic checked Athena's vital signs and adjusted her IV drip. Marco had returned to his position, maintaining perimeter security, but Frederick caught his second-in-command watching the scene with unusual attention. Even men who'd built careers on violence and tactical precision weren't immune to the particular ache of watching a parent reunite with their child after genuine danger. "Ma'am, you need to keep still for a few more minutes," the paramedic said gently but firmly, trying to check blood pressure while Athena clutched her daughter. "Your glucose levels are stabilizing, but you're not out of danger yet. We should really transport you to the hospital for observation." The medical recommendation made practical sense, but Frederick could already see Athena's body language shifting into resistance, the set of her shoulders that said she'd refuse treatment rather than risk separation from Kylie again. "I can't go to a hospital," Athena said, her voice gaining strength despite obvious physical weakness. "We have a flight to catch, a meeting in San Francisco that can't be rescheduled. I'll be fine now. I just forgot to eat this morning because we were rushing to catch the early flight and then the delays." She was already trying to stand, to prove her stability, to demonstrate that she could power through crisis like she probably powered through everything else. Broke, exhausted, diabetic, but still moving forward. The paramedic looked to Frederick as if he had authority in this situation, as if his expensive suit and air of command meant he could convince this stubborn woman to accept proper medical care. "Sir, can you help me explain that she really should be evaluated? Hypoglycemic episodes can have delayed complications." The appeal put Frederick in an impossible position. He had no actual relationship to these people, no right to influence their medical decisions. Yet Kylie was looking at him too with those wide, trusting eyes. "How long until your blood sugar is fully stable?" Frederick asked Athena directly, treating her like an adult capable of assessing her own risk, rather than a patient who needed management. "And what's the actual danger if you don't go to the hospital versus if you just rest here with monitoring?" He wanted the information that would let her make an informed choice, not the paternalistic assumption that she couldn't handle her own chronic condition. Athena met his eyes for the first time, really looked at him, and Frederick saw her processing who he was, the expensive suit, the commanding presence, the security detail that hadn't escaped her writer's observation skills. "You're the person who found her," she said, the statement carrying weight beyond simple gratitude. "Kylie told me about the problem solver who has a daughter and watches all the exits." Her description revealed just how much Kylie had shared during their time together, how much this perceptive child had seen. "Frederick Castellano," he introduced himself formally, extending his hand to a woman sitting in a wheelchair with an IV in her arm. "I was sitting near where your daughter was waiting." She asked if I was lost too. The echo of Kylie's question hung between them, carrying layers of meaning neither of them acknowledged directly. He had been lost, was still lost, just not geographically. Athena took his hand, her grip surprisingly strong despite the medical crisis she'd just survived. "Athena Morrison. And I'm guessing you're not just some random businessman given the friends watching from tactical positions." Her directness caught Frederick off guard. Most civilians didn't identify security details, didn't call out the obvious pretense of coincidental helpfulness. But Athena wasn't most civilians. She was someone who'd taught her daughter to spot threats and read behavioral patterns because their survival had depended on it. "I solve problems that normal channels can't handle," Frederick admitted, giving her the same careful truth he'd given Kylie. "Security consulting, risk management, personnel protection." The sanitized description of his empire sounded almost legitimate when spoken to a woman who'd just nearly died alone in an airport bathroom. He didn't mention the shipments or the cryptocurrency or the $3 million he'd let slip away because her daughter had needed help. "Thank you for not leaving her alone," Athena said, her voice breaking slightly on the words. "Thank you for being someone safe when she needed it. I teach her to trust her instincts about people, to look for the ones who watch the exits because they're thinking about protection, not escape routes." The distinction she drew revealed sophisticated understanding of human behavior, the kind that came from studying threats intimately enough to recognize the difference between predatory surveillance and protective awareness. The paramedic cleared his throat, reminding them that medical decisions still needed to be made. "Mrs. Morrison, your glucose is at 95 now, which is approaching normal range. I can't force you to go to the hospital, but I strongly recommend at least staying here for observation for the next hour." His compromise offered a middle path between full hospitalization and immediate dismissal, acknowledging Athena's autonomy while still providing medical oversight. Athena looked at Kylie, then at the departure board showing their San Francisco flight's new departure time. Still 2 hours away thanks to weather delays. "We can stay for an hour," she agreed, the decision visibly costing her something. Frederick recognized that internal calculation. Accepting help meant acknowledging vulnerability, meant letting strangers see your weaknesses, meant creating debt you might not be able to repay. It was the same calculation that kept him isolated in terminals handling business alone. "There's a VIP lounge in this terminal," Frederick heard himself offering, the words emerging before strategic consideration could stop them. "Private space, comfortable seating, food service. Better than sitting here in the corridor with everyone watching." He pulled out his phone, already texting Marco to arrange access. His company maintained memberships in executive lounges across every major airport for exactly this kind of situation, though usually for business purposes, rather than helping diabetic single mothers. Athena's expression flickered with suspicion, warring against exhausted gratitude. "Why would you do that? You don't know us." The question carried the particular wariness of someone who'd learned that generosity usually came with strings attached, that men who offered help to vulnerable women often expected payment in forms that made your skin crawl. Frederick recognized that wariness because he'd weaponized it himself, using people's desperation to create loyalty that looked like choice. "Because my daughter is 5 years old, and if I were stuck in an airport alone with a medical emergency, I'd hope someone would help her wait somewhere safe and comfortable," Frederick answered with brutal honesty. "Because Kylie shared her granola bar with a stranger and asked if I was lost too, and that kind of kindness deserves better than sitting on the floor by an information desk." He didn't mention that helping them felt like partial redemption for all the times he'd chosen profit over presence in his own daughter's life. Kylie tugged on her mother's sleeve, adding her voice to the persuasion. "Mr. Frederick has people who watch doors like you do, Mommy. He solves problems for complicated people, and he let me hold his hand when I got scared about you." The 5-year-old's endorsement carried weight that Frederick's business card never could. Her instincts about safety providing the credibility that Athena needed to accept help from a stranger who looked like he could afford to own problems rather than solve them. "Okay," Athena finally agreed, her body sagging slightly in the wheelchair with relief at not having to maintain vigilance for the next hour. "Thank you. We'll stay in the lounge until my levels are stable in our flight boards." The acceptance came with visible surrender of control, trusting Frederick's offered kindness because exhaustion and medical necessity didn't leave room for paranoid caution. She was choosing to believe he was safe because the alternative was refusing help her body desperately needed. The VIP lounge occupied a quiet corner of Terminal B, accessible through a discreet door that most travelers passed without noticing. Frederick's membership card granted immediate entry, the desk attendant's professional smile widening with recognition of his name and status. Marco held the door while the paramedic wheeled Athena inside, Kylie walking alongside, clutching her mother's hand like she might disappear again if contact broke for even a second. The space was designed for comfort and privacy. Leather chairs arranged in intimate clusters, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the tarmac, a buffet of fresh food that made Kylie's eyes go wide with hunger she'd been too polite to mention. The contrast between this quiet luxury and the chaotic terminal they'd left behind felt almost obscene, a reminder of how money bought not just things but peace, space, freedom from the crush of other people's desperation. "Help yourself to food," Frederick told Kylie, gesturing toward the buffet where pastries and fruit and hot dishes waited under warming lights. "Your mom needs to eat too, protein and complex carbs to keep her blood sugar stable." He directed the last comment to Athena, who was watching everything with the sharp attention of someone cataloging details for later. The writer in her was probably already constructing narratives about wealthy businessmen and chance encounters, filing away observations for future stories. Kylie approached the buffet with reverent caution, like someone not quite believing this abundance was truly available to her. She selected items carefully: a banana, a croissant, a small container of yogurt, taking only what seemed reasonable rather than loading up despite obvious hunger. The restraint in her choices told Frederick everything about how Athena had raised her, teaching careful resource management because scarcity had been their constant companion. "Take more," Frederick said gently, coming to stand beside Kylie at the buffet. "Take whatever you want. Nobody's counting here." He loaded a plate with more substantial options: cheese, crackers, grapes, a sandwich, and brought it to where Athena now sat in a proper chair. the wheelchair abandoned and the IV removed since her levels had stabilized enough for the paramedic to leave them under the lounge staff's observation. Athena accepted the plate with murmured thanks, her hands still trembling slightly as she reached for the sandwich. I really did just forget to eat this morning. We've been living on adrenaline and hope for so long that I forget my body still has actual needs. The admission came with self-deprecating humor that didn't quite mask the exhaustion underneath. She took a bite of sandwich with the mechanical efficiency of someone fueling a machine rather than enjoying a meal. Frederick settled into a chair across from her, while Kylie arranged her collected food on the low table between them with meticulous care, creating small organized piles like she was setting up a dinner party. The San Francisco meeting, he ventured carefully. It's for your writing? He was genuinely curious about the life Athena was building, the future she was chasing with such determination that she'd pushed her body past its limits. Potential publisher interested in my manuscript about second chances, Athena confirmed, some energy returning to her voice as she discussed her work. 3 years of writing between shifts, rejection letters that could wallpaper a house, and finally someone wants to talk about a contract. It's not guaranteed, but it's the first real possibility of getting published, of maybe making enough to stop waitressing doubles and actually have time with Kylie. The dream she described was simultaneously modest and enormous: financial stability, time with her child, validation that her writing had value beyond personal expression. Frederick thought about his own pursuits of wealth and power, how he'd acquired millions but lost hours and days and years he could never reclaim with Sophia. Success looked different depending on where you started, what you'd been forced to sacrifice, what you were still hoping to recover. What do you write about? Frederick asked, watching Kylie arrange grapes in a perfect circle around her yogurt container with the focused concentration children brought to tasks adults found meaningless, besides second chances. He was stalling the moment when he'd have to return to his own interrupted business, when this strange interlude would end, and these people would board their flight to San Francisco, while he flew to Chicago to face partners angry about missed confirmations. Romance, Athena said with a slight defensive edge, as if expecting dismissal of the genre. Love stories about people who've been broken by life but find each other anyway, characters who've made mistakes or survived tragedies and don't believe they deserve happiness until someone sees them clearly and chooses them despite everything. The description was clearly personal, her fiction drawn from intimate understanding of damage and hope coexisting in the same heart. Frederick heard echoes of his own story in that summary, broken by choices that seemed necessary at the time, convinced that isolation was protection, building walls so high that genuine connection became impossible. Sounds like the kind of stories people need, he offered, meaning it more than she could know. Proof that messing up doesn't mean you're permanently disqualified from being loved. Athena studied him with new intensity, her writer's eye clearly seeing past expensive suits to the loneliness he carried like armor. Kylie said you watch all the exits, even when you're looking at your phone. That's someone who's been hurt enough times to never stop calculating escape routes. Her observation wasn't accusation, just recognition. One damaged person identifying another across the careful distance they both maintained from the world. Occupational hazard, Frederick deflected with a slight smile. My work requires constant threat assessment. You stop seeing rooms and start seeing tactical situations. It was true enough without being complete truth, acknowledging his hypervigilance without explaining why civilian airport terminals might actually contain threats to his life. Men in his position didn't survive by assuming safety anywhere. My work requires constant people assessment, Athena countered. You stop seeing individuals and start seeing character types, motivation patterns, the wounds that drive behavior. She took another bite of sandwich, her color improving as the food and previous glucose treatment did their work. So I see a man who solves problems for complicated people, who maintains private security in airports, who helps lost children despite having urgent business elsewhere. Someone choosing kindness even though cynicism would be easier. The assessment made Frederick uncomfortable in its accuracy, revealing more about him than he'd intended to share with a stranger he'd met an hour ago. You're giving me too much credit. I just didn't want to leave a kid alone. He tried to minimize the decision, to frame it as simple decency rather than the significant choice it had actually been, choosing human need over profit, vulnerability over calculation. You gave up something important to help us, Athena insisted quietly, glancing at his phone where notification after notification had been silently accumulating throughout their crisis. Business that couldn't wait, judging by how many times you've checked your messages without responding. Whatever you lost by staying with Kylie, it was significant. Her perception was unnervingly accurate. seeing through his attempts at casual dismissal to the actual cost of his kindness. Frederick didn't deny it, because lies felt wrong in this space where they'd accidentally created safety together. $3 million deal that required confirmation in a window I missed, because your daughter asked if I was lost too. The confession emerged without his usual careful editing, the truth stark and strange. My partners are probably already working with the backup supplier, wondering why I dropped completely silent. Athena's eyes widened at the figure, processing the magnitude of what his choice had cost. $3 million. You stayed with Kylie instead of confirming a $3 million deal. She looked at her daughter, still arranging food with artistic precision, oblivious to the business discussion happening above her head. Frederick, I don't know how to process that someone would choose helping us over that kind of money. It's just money, Frederick said, surprising himself with the dismissal of a sum he'd once killed to protect. It'll come around again in different form. But Kylie needed someone to not walk away, and apparently, I needed to be that person more than I needed the cryptocurrency transfer. The admission revealed something about his own hunger for redemption that he usually kept buried under tactical planning and profit calculations. Kylie had finished arranging her food and now ate with the focused determination of someone making up for missed meals, her small face serious as she alternated between bites of croissant and careful spoonfuls of yogurt. Frederick watched her methodical approach to eating and recognized the same discipline he'd taught Sophia about finishing tasks completely before moving to the next. These survival skills children learned, whether from necessity or training, shaped them in ways that lasted long after the circumstances that required them had passed. Mr. Frederick, Kylie said between bites, do you think Mommy and I will like San Francisco? She showed me pictures of the hills and the bridge, but I've never seen an ocean before. The question carried the particular mixture of excitement and anxiety that accompanied major life changes, the hope that this move would finally be the one that stuck, that created stability, instead of just another temporary station before the next escape. I think you'll like anywhere your mom is, Frederick answered honestly, the truth of it settling something in his chest. The location matters less than having someone who makes sure you eat breakfast and teaches you to notice the world around you. He wasn't talking about San Francisco anymore, but about the security Athena provided despite economic precarity, the emotional safety she'd built for her daughter even when physical safety had been compromised. Athena's eyes glistened at his words, a small crack in the armor she maintained showing through. I'm trying to give her what I didn't have, a parent who shows up consistently, who prioritizes her needs, who teaches her that love doesn't come with conditions or violence. The last word slipped out before she could catch it, revealing another piece of their history. Kylie's father hadn't just died. He'd been violent, and his death had probably been relief mixed with grief. Frederick understood that particular cocktail of emotions, had felt it himself when his own father had died in prison, serving time for crimes that paled compared to what Frederick himself had done since taking over the family business. Liberation and loss tangled together until you couldn't separate them, until you stopped trying to figure out whether you were supposed to mourn or celebrate. You just moved forward because the alternative was drowning in complicated feelings. Sophia's mother left when she was 6 months old, Frederick heard himself sharing, words he rarely spoke aloud even to people in his inner circle. Decided motherhood wasn't what she'd signed up for, that being connected to me and my business was too dangerous or too boring or both. So I've been doing the single-parent thing for 5 years, mostly failing at the balance between keeping her safe and actually being present. The confession emerged with surprising ease in this quiet lounge space. But you showed up today, Athena pointed out gently, her writer's instinct for the truth cutting through his self-criticism. When Kylie needed help, you didn't calculate the cost-benefit analysis and walk away. You sat with her. You searched with her. You brought us here where she could eat real food and I could recover without public spectacle. That's showing up, Frederick. That's the part that counts. Her validation landed somewhere deep in his chest, where he usually kept guilt locked away. Kylie pushed her empty yogurt container aside and retrieved Mr. Flops from her backpack, settling the one-eared rabbit on her lap with tender care. Mommy says showing up is harder than people think, because it means letting others see you when you're not perfect. She says brave people show up anyway, even when they're scared or tired or don't have all the answers. The 5-year-old's philosophical summary of courage made Frederick wonder what kind of woman Athena would be if circumstances hadn't forced her into survival mode. Your daughter is wise beyond her years, Frederick told Athena, watching Kylie hum quietly to Mr. Flops while the rabbit presumably listened to important secrets. She's going to write better books than you someday. with all the human observation skills you've taught her. The prediction wasn't empty flattery, but genuine assessment. This child who spotted suspicious briefcases and read emotional states through body language had the raw material for powerful storytelling. Athena laughed, the sound carrying genuine warmth despite the exhaustion still evident in her posture. God, I hope so. I hope she gets to grow up safe enough that her writing comes from imagination instead of processing trauma. I hope she never has to learn the difference between a man who watches exits because he's protective versus one who's calculating attack vectors. The distinction she drew revealed just how much violence had shaped her own observations, how survival had required her to become expert at reading danger. The publisher meeting tomorrow, Frederick said, shifting to practical concerns that might actually help their situation. Do you have a place to stay in San Francisco? Transportation from the airport arranged? He knew the answer before she spoke, could read it in the way her jaw tightened slightly, the micro-expression of someone about to admit vulnerability they'd rather hide. Single mothers escaping bad situations rarely had comfortable financial margins for hotels and car services. We'll figure it out when we land, Athena deflected with practiced vagueness. There are budget hotels near the airport, and the publisher's office is downtown, so we'll take the BART or a bus. The casual mention of public transportation with luggage and a 5-year-old revealed exactly how thin her resources were stretched. She'd flown here on tickets she probably couldn't afford for a meeting that might not result in a contract, gambling everything on the possibility of better circumstances. Frederick pulled out his phone and began typing before he could talk himself out of the offer forming in his mind. I have a corporate apartment in San Francisco that sits empty most of the time. 2 bedrooms, fully furnished, stocked kitchen. You're welcome to stay there for however long you need. He sent the address and access codes to his assistant with instructions to arrange immediate availability, the kind of resource deployment that was effortless for him, but life-changing for someone sleeping in budget hotels with a kindergartner. Frederick, no! Athena protested immediately, her pride fighting against desperate need for exactly this kind of help. You've already done too much. You can't just give us an apartment. The refusal came with visible internal struggle, wanting to accept, needing to accept, but terrified of what strings might be attached or what debt she'd be incurring. In her experience, men who offered expensive gifts expected expensive returns, usually extracted from women's bodies and autonomy. I'm not giving you an apartment. I'm letting it be used instead of sitting vacant, Frederick clarified, understanding her wariness and respecting it even as he worked around it. The company pays for it whether anyone's there or not. It's a business resource that might as well benefit someone who needs it. No strings, no expectations, just a safe place to sleep while you're building your new life. He kept his tone matter-of-fact, treating this like a logical business decision rather than charity. Kylie looked up from her conversation with Mr. Flops, tuning into the adult discussion with her characteristic attention to important moments. Mommy, Mr. Frederick is doing what you always say to do, using what you have to help people who need it. He has an empty apartment and we need a place to stay. That's just good resource management. The 5-year-old's practical analysis of the situation made both adults pause, her innocent logic cutting through the complicated emotional dynamics. Out of the mouths of babes, Athena murmured, shaking her head with reluctant amusement. Fine, we'll stay in your apartment, but only until I get the advance from the publisher and can afford our own place. And I'm paying you back for any expenses we incur. Electricity, water, whatever. This is a loan of space, not a gift. Her terms allowed her to accept while maintaining some sense of agency, some control over a situation where she had very little actual power. Deal, Frederick agreed, respecting her need to frame this as temporary and transactional rather than as the one-sided generosity it actually was. His phone buzzed with confirmation from his assistant. Apartment ready, keys accessible via lockbox. Welcome basket being delivered with basic groceries and supplies. The machinery of his resources moving efficiently to solve a problem was something he took for granted, but watching Athena's face as he showed her the confirmation message, he saw what it meant to someone for whom every small crisis required exhausting improvisation. The lounge had grown quieter as afternoon shifted toward early evening, most travelers having departed for their gates or settled into the rhythm of delayed departures. A pianist in the corner had begun playing soft jazz standards that created ambient soundtrack to their conversation, the kind of background music designed to soothe frayed nerves and make expensive spaces feel worth their membership fees. Frederick noticed how Athena's shoulders had finally dropped from their defensive hunch, how color had returned fully to her face as the food and glucose stabilized her system. She looked younger when not braced for the next crisis, when allowed to simply exist in a moment without calculating survival strategies. Kylie had abandoned her empty plate to explore the lounge's small library corner, running her fingers along book spines with the reverence of someone who'd learned to treat books as treasures, because new ones were rare luxuries. She pulled a picture book from the shelf and settled into an oversized chair that swallowed her small frame, Mr. Flops positioned beside her as reading companion. The image of her daughter safe and occupied allowed Athena to turn her full attention back to Frederick, and he felt the weight of her gaze assessing him with new depth, the writer's eye cataloging details she'd been too crisis-focused to notice before. His watch was expensive but understated, his shoes custom but not flashy. Everything about his presentation suggesting wealth that didn't need to announce itself because power did that announcing automatically. "The address is in Pacific Heights," Frederick added, watching her process that information with widening eyes. 3 blocks from a good elementary school, walking distance to cafes and bookstores, safe neighborhood. He didn't mention the property value, or the fact that his corporate apartment was actually a $2 million condo he kept for the rare occasions when business brought him to the West Coast. Let her think it was some modest company housing, rather than the luxury it actually represented. Pacific Heights, Athena repeated slowly, probably calculating what rent in that neighborhood would cost, realizing that his casual corporate apartment was someone else's entire life dream. "Frederick, I don't even know what to say. That area is where people like me write stories about, not where we actually live." Her voice carried awe mixed with discomfort, the cognitive dissonance of having fairy tale circumstances dropped into her difficult reality. "Say you'll let Kylie enroll in that elementary school if the publisher meeting goes well," Frederick suggested, giving her a concrete way to accept his help that focused on her daughter's benefit rather than her own need. "Say you'll use the time and space to finish your next manuscript. Say you'll stop sleeping in budget hotels and start sleeping somewhere your diabetes won't be triggered by stress and missed meals." Each reframe shifted the dynamic from charity to investment in their future. Athena reached across the small table and took Frederick's hand, her grip firm, despite the lingering weakness from her medical crisis. "Thank you for everything, for staying with Kylie, for getting me medical help, for this apartment I don't deserve, but desperately need. You've given us a chance to actually build something instead of just surviving day to day." Tears tracked down her face, but her voice stayed steady, gratitude and hope mixing into something that looked dangerously like the second chances she wrote about in her novels. Frederick squeezed her hand once before releasing it, uncomfortable with the weight of her gratitude even as something in him needed to hear it. "You deserve it because you're raising a kid who offers granola bars to strangers and believes in helping people even when you have nothing to give. That kind of parenting in circumstances that should have made you bitter and closed off is worth every resource I can spare." He meant it with an intensity that surprised him, this fierce belief in protecting what Athena and Kylie represented. The departure board visible through the lounge windows updated with new information, their San Francisco flight now boarding in 45 minutes at gate C-15. The crisis had passed into normalcy, into the routine moments of travel and transition. Soon, they would board separate planes heading to different cities, this strange interlude ending as abruptly as it had begun. Frederick felt the approaching separation as an unexpected loss, as if he'd found something important and was already watching it slip away. Frederick sat in his Chicago office 6 weeks after the airport encounter, reviewing quarterly profit reports that should have commanded his full attention, but somehow felt less important than they had before Kylie asked if he was lost too. The numbers were good, better than good actually, with new distribution channels opening and law enforcement attention focused elsewhere. His empire was thriving in the way criminal enterprises did when leadership remained sharp and competitors stayed eliminated or intimidated into cooperation. But the success felt hollow in ways that Frederick couldn't quite articulate even to himself. The usual satisfaction of winning at a game where losing meant prison or death, replaced by restless questioning of whether winning this particular game was worth the cost. He'd missed another of Sophia's writing lessons yesterday, stuck in a meeting with suppliers who demanded FaceTime to trust the new arrangements. His daughter had stopped asking when he'd be home for dinner, accepting his absence as default state rather than exception. His personal email pinged with a notification that pulled him from the financial spreadsheets and their evidence of blood money converted into legitimate assets through layers of corporate complexity. The sender name stopped him cold, Athena Morrison, the woman from the airport whose crisis had cost him $3 million and somehow hadn't made him regret the loss. He'd thought about them occasionally over the past weeks, wondering if the publisher meeting had gone well, if they were settling into the apartment he'd offered. The email opened with a photo attachment that loaded slowly on his secured connection. Kylie standing in front of a bookshelf in what Frederick recognized as his Pacific Heights apartment's living room, holding up a drawing she'd made. The picture showed 3 stick figures labeled Me, Mommy, and Mr. Frederick, all holding hands under a sun with rays extending to the edges of the paper. The innocent artistry made something in Frederick's chest twist uncomfortably, reminded him that children created permanence from brief encounters, that 5-year-olds didn't understand the difference between temporary kindness and lasting connection. "Dear Frederick," the email began, Athena's voice coming through in the careful word choices and slightly formal tone. "I hope this message finds you well, and that I'm not overstepping by reaching out to your personal email. Kylie insisted I send you the picture she drew, and I confess I wanted to update you on how your extraordinary generosity has changed our lives." The opening acknowledged their strange relationship. Not quite friends, not business associates, something undefined that existed because of crisis and choice. She wrote about the publisher meeting that had exceeded her hopes, resulting in a 2-book deal with an advance substantial enough to cover several months of expenses, while she completed revisions on the first manuscript. The contract wouldn't make her wealthy, but it created breathing room she hadn't experienced in years, space between survival and crisis, where actual life could happen. She'd enrolled Kylie in the elementary school Frederick had mentioned, the one 3 blocks from his apartment, and her daughter was thriving with educational stability she'd never had before. The details Athena shared painted a picture of normalcy that Frederick envied despite his wealth and power. School pickups and playground conversations with other parents, writing sessions in cafes while Kylie did homework, cooking dinners in a kitchen large enough to move comfortably. The apartment he'd offered without thinking had become the foundation for the kind of life Athena had been chasing through multiple relocations and desperate gambles. His casual resource deployment had been her miracle, and the disparity in what it meant to each of them made Frederick acutely aware of his privilege. "Kylie asks about you constantly," Athena's email continued, the admission carrying weight Frederick felt across the digital distance. "She wants to know if you found what you were looking for, if you're still lost or if someone helped you like you helped us. I don't have answers to give her because I don't know if it's appropriate to maintain contact after everything you've done. But I'm writing anyway because Kylie's instincts about people have kept us safe, and she believes you need friends as much as we needed your help." The observation hit Frederick with uncomfortable accuracy. Kylie's question about whether he was lost had been literal for her but metaphorically precise for him. He was lost, had been lost for years in the machinery of his criminal empire, going through motions of accumulation and protection, without clear destination or purpose beyond survival and dominance. The child had seen through his expensive suit and tactical awareness to the fundamental loneliness underneath, the same isolation Athena carried despite being surrounded by her daughter's love. Frederick read the email 3 times, processing not just the words, but the decision behind sending it. Athena reaching out despite uncertainty about appropriateness, despite the power imbalance between them, despite not knowing what he might expect in return. She was choosing connection over self-protection, vulnerability over safety, exactly the kind of courage she'd described her characters needing in her romance novels. The realization that she was treating him like a potential friend, rather than a dangerous stranger or useful resource, shifted something fundamental in his chest. He composed his response carefully, weighing each word for tone and implication, trying to convey warmth without creating pressure or expectation. "Athena, I'm genuinely glad the publisher meeting went well, and that you and Kylie are settling into San Francisco. Please tell Kylie that her drawing is now hanging in my office, which has confused my business associates considerably. They can't figure out why their rather serious boss has child art displayed next to financial projections." The humor felt rusty but real, an attempt at lightness with someone who might appreciate it. Frederick continued typing, surprising himself with the honesty that emerged when writing to someone who'd seen him at his most human, rather than his most powerful. To answer Kylie's question, "I'm still figuring out if I'm lost or just taking a very long route to somewhere I haven't identified yet. But helping you both that day in the airport reminded me that the route matters as much as the destination, that who you choose to be in random moments defines you more than the goals you're pursuing." The philosophical reflection would have embarrassed him to share with anyone else, but Athena had earned the right to his unguarded thoughts. He offered an invitation before he could second-guess the impulse, typing quickly to bypass his usual strategic calculation. I have business in San Francisco next month that will keep me there for several days. Would you and Kylie be interested in meeting for dinner? There's a restaurant in North Beach that has excellent pasta and doesn't mind if kids spend the meal drawing on placemats. No pressure if that feels too complicated, but I'd genuinely like to see how you're both doing." The casualness of the suggestion belied how much he wanted them to say yes. Frederick hit send before he could edit the email into something more guarded, more befitting a man in his position, who shouldn't be cultivating friendship with civilians who'd witnessed his capacity for both kindness and the controlled violence implied by his security detail. The message disappeared into the digital ether, and Frederick returned to his profit reports with renewed restlessness, numbers that proved his success at a game he increasingly wasn't sure he wanted to keep playing. Athena's response came 3 hours later, fast enough to suggest she'd been hoping for his reply, waiting to see if Frederick would reciprocate her reaching out or politely decline the implicit offer of continued connection. "Dinner would be wonderful. Kylie will be impossibly excited, and honestly, so will I. It's been a long time since I had an adult conversation with someone who understands that life is complicated and messy, but still worth showing up for." She included the dates she was available and signed off with warmth that felt genuine rather than obligatory. Frederick found himself smiling at his computer screen, a rare expression in this office where most business involved threatening or being threatened, negotiating terms that always included implicit violence as enforcement mechanism. The simplicity of dinner with a woman and her daughter shouldn't feel revolutionary, but it cut through the isolation he'd built so thoroughly that he'd stopped noticing its weight. Kylie had asked if he was lost, and maybe the answer was yes, but perhaps getting found was as simple as accepting invitations to normal human connection. He forwarded the dinner confirmation to his assistant with instructions to clear his evening schedule for the date Athena suggested, treating this appointment with the same priority as meetings with cartel representatives or corrupt officials. The juxtaposition wasn't lost on him. Pasta dinner with a 5-year-old receiving the same calendar weight as negotiations involving millions of dollars and potential lethal consequences. But Frederick was learning that priority revealed itself in choices about time allocation, and he was choosing differently than he had before. An airport encounter changed his calculations. Marco appeared in his office doorway without knocking, a privilege only his second-in-command enjoyed. "Boss, you've got that look," Marco observed with the bluntness of someone who'd known Frederick for 15 years and survived multiple attempts on both their lives. The one you get when you're about to make a decision the family won't understand. The family Marco referenced wasn't biological, but organizational. The network of criminals who depended on Frederick's strategic thinking and willingness to do what needed doing without moral hesitation. "Just accepting a dinner invitation," Frederick replied mildly, not looking up from his computer where he was already researching restaurants near Athena's location that would suit a child-friendly evening. "Nothing that affects business operations." The deflection came automatically, but Marco's skeptical expression suggested he wasn't buying the dismissal. In their world, everything affected business operations because there was no separation between personal and professional. Your relationships were either assets or liabilities, tools or vulnerabilities. The restaurant Frederick selected for their San Francisco dinner occupied a converted Victorian in North Beach, family-owned for 3 generations with red check tablecloths and genuine warmth that money couldn't manufacture artificially. He'd discovered it years ago during a business trip that had gone sideways, spending hours hiding from potential threat in their back dining room while the owners plied him with pasta and pretended not to notice the gun under his jacket. They'd never asked questions, never demanded explanations, just kept his coffee cup full and his presence unremarked upon until danger passed. It was the kind of establishment that understood how to be sanctuary without making it awkward, and Frederick thought Athena and Kylie might appreciate that particular species of quiet acceptance. The month between confirming dinner plans and actually sitting across from them in that restaurant stretched interminably, despite being packed with the usual chaos of Frederick's operation. Territory disputes requiring negotiation, supply chain disruptions demanding creative problem-solving, the endless tactical chess of staying ahead of law enforcement interest while maintaining profitable enterprise. But underneath the familiar rhythm of criminal administration, Frederick found himself thinking about what he'd wear to dinner, whether bringing Sophia would be too much too soon, or exactly the right move to show Athena he was serious about this being real friendship, rather than calculated networking. The uncertainty felt foreign and uncomfortable. This caring about someone's opinion of him beyond whether they feared or respected his capacity for violence. "The woman and kid from the airport," Marco stated rather than asked, his intelligence network obviously having kept tabs on the situation even after the crisis ended. The ones you gave the Pacific Heights place to. The ones whose situation cost you the Rodriguez deal. His recitation of facts carried no judgment, just observation, waiting to see how Frederick would contextualize choices that looked dangerously like attachment to people who couldn't offer any strategic value. Frederick met Marco's gaze directly, willing him to understand something Frederick himself was only beginning to articulate. That 5-year-old asked me if I was lost too, and I realized I've been lost for a decade while thinking I knew exactly where I was going. Maybe it's time to try a different route. The explanation was insufficient but true. The best he could offer to explain why he was investing time and attention in people who represented everything his position required him to avoid. Vulnerability, genuine care, the possibility of choosing connection over calculation. Marco absorbed this for several long seconds, then nodded slowly with something that might have been understanding, or might have been resignation that his boss was veering into territory that made security complicated. Just remember that different routes don't change the destination if you're still starting from the same place, and our starting place has a lot of bodies buried in the foundation. The warning was gentle but real. Frederick couldn't escape what he'd done, or what he was by having dinner with a struggling writer and her perceptive daughter. I know, Frederick acknowledged quietly, the weight of his history settling back onto shoulders that had briefly felt lighter. But maybe I can choose who I'm becoming, even if I can't change who I've been. Maybe that matters more than I've given it credit for. The philosophy felt fragile and uncertain, but something about Kylie's drawing hanging on his wall and Athena's invitation to normal human friendship made him want to believe that choosing differently going forward could mean something despite everything that came before. 11 months after their first meeting, Frederick stood in the same Terminal B of the same airport, though this time he wasn't alone in the quiet corner by the windows. Sophia held his hand with the excited grip of a 6-year-old about to meet the girl from Daddy's stories, the one who'd asked if he was lost and somehow helped him find direction he hadn't known he needed. His daughter wore her favorite purple dress and had insisted on bringing a gift, a stuffed horse from her riding stable, carefully selected because Mr. Frederick had mentioned Kylie's one-eared rabbit. The past year had unfolded in email exchanges that became video calls, that became weekend visits when Frederick's business in San Francisco occurred with increasing frequency. Athena's first book had published to modest but genuine success, her stories about broken people finding each other resonating with readers who recognized their own complicated relationships to love and redemption. Kylie had thrived in her new school, making friends and losing some of the hyper-vigilant wariness that came from unstable housing and constant relocation. Frederick had made changes too, harder ones that involved restructuring his business relationships and beginning the long, complicated process of extracting himself from the most dangerous aspects of his empire. He couldn't erase what he'd done or suddenly become legitimate, but he could choose which deals to accept going forward, could start redirecting his considerable resources toward operations that didn't require violence as primary enforcement. Marco thought he was losing his edge, growing soft, but Frederick didn't care because Sophia had started asking when she'd see him at dinner, instead of accepting his absence as inevitable. "Is that them?" Sophia asked suddenly, pointing toward the security exit where passengers emerged from their flights. Frederick followed her gaze and saw Athena pushing Kylie's rolling suitcase, her daughter walking beside her wearing jeans that looked new rather than patched, both of them scanning the crowd with the particular attention Frederick recognized as looking for familiar faces. The sight of them made something in his chest settle into place, a piece he hadn't known was missing until it returned. Kylie spotted them first, her face transforming with pure joy as she broke away from her mother, and ran toward Frederick with the complete trust she'd shown that first day in the terminal when she'd asked if he was lost too. Frederick released Sophia's hand just in time to catch Kylie as she launched herself at him, wrapping small arms around his waist with enough force to almost knock him backwards. The hug carried 11 months of video calls and emails, of growing friendship between two families built from wreckage. "Mr. Frederick," Kylie exclaimed, pulling back to beam up at him, before turning her attention to Sophia with barely contained excitement. "You must be Sophia. Your dad has told me so much about your horse riding and your favorite books, and how you're learning to play piano." The introduction came in a rush of words. Kylie's natural warmth immediately extended to this new person, connected to someone she'd adopted into her small circle of trusted adults. Sophia responded with a shy smile that grew more confident as she pulled the stuffed horse from behind her back. "I'm Sophia. This is Princess, but you can rename her if you want. Dad said your rabbit lost an ear, so I thought maybe Princess could be friends with him." The gift offered with both generosity and uncertainty, hoping for acceptance from this girl who'd somehow become important before they'd even met. Kylie accepted Princess with reverent care, holding the plush horse like it was made of crystal rather than polyester fill. Mr. Flops is going to love her. He's been lonely being the only stuffed animal, and Mommy says everyone needs friends who understand what it's like to need someone. The philosophical observation from a 6-year-old made both Frederick and Athena exchange glances over their daughters' heads, the look carrying recognition of how their children's wisdom kept reshaping their adult understanding of what mattered. Athena reached them, and Frederick found himself pulling her into a hug that felt natural, despite the months between physical contact. The kind of embrace that said, "I'm glad you're safe. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad we're doing this." She returned the pressure with equal warmth, her face pressed briefly against his shoulder, in a gesture that spoke of trust earned through consistent follow-through on promises made. When they separated, both were smiling with the particular satisfaction of people who'd bet on connection and won. "The apartment has been perfect," Athena said, as they walked together toward baggage claim, their daughters already chattering like old friends reunited rather than new acquaintances just meeting. "The publisher wants a 3rd book, and I've actually had space and time to write it. Kylie's teacher says she's reading 2 grade levels ahead. We're building something real, Frederick. And it started because you didn't walk away when walking away would have been easier." The gratitude in her voice had matured from the desperate relief of that first day into something deeper, acknowledgement of sustained support rather than one-time rescue. Frederick hefted Kylie's suitcase alongside Sophia's smaller bag, playing the role of porter, with amusement at how far he'd come from the man who'd sat alone negotiating cryptocurrency deals while chaos swirled around him. "You built it," he corrected gently. "I just provided an empty apartment and showed up when invited. The writing and the parenting and the stability, that's all you choosing to create something better than what you escaped from." He meant it, even though he knew his resources had made the difference between success and continued struggle. "We're going to the aquarium tomorrow," Kylie announced to Sophia with barely contained excitement, the 2 girls now walking slightly ahead of their parents with the unconscious intimacy of children who'd decided to be friends. "Have you ever seen a shark up close? Mommy says they're not as scary as movies make them seem, that they're just doing what they need to do to survive, and that doesn't make them monsters." The explanation carried Athena's philosophy about complicated morality, about understanding that survival sometimes required actions that looked threatening from outside. Frederick caught the metaphor in Kylie's excited chatter about sharks, and felt it land in his chest with the weight of absolution he hadn't known he needed. Athena was teaching her daughter that dangerous didn't equal evil, that creatures who did harm in service of survival weren't automatically irredeemable. It was the kind of moral framework that allowed space for men like Frederick to be both the person who ordered violence and the person who helped lost children, to contain multitudes that didn't cancel each other out, but existed in complicated coexistence. They reached baggage claim where carousel number 3 was just beginning to rotate with luggage from Athena's flight. The girls positioned themselves right at the edge, ready to spot their bags first, competing good-naturedly over who would identify them fastest. Frederick stood beside Athena in comfortable silence, watching their daughters interact with the particular contentment of parents, seeing their children happy and safe and free to just be kids, without adult complications weighing them down. "I wanted to tell you in person, rather than over email," Athena said quietly, her voice carrying nervousness that immediately put Frederick on alert for whatever confession was coming. "There's someone in my writers group who's been asking me out for coffee. He's nice, stable, works as a high school English teacher. No criminal empire, no security detail, no complicated past involving violence." She rushed through the description like ripping off a bandage, watching his face for reaction she clearly feared. Frederick processed the information and the complicated emotions it triggered. Relief that she was building a life that included potential romance with someone appropriate, unexpected jealousy that surprised him with its intensity, genuine happiness that she felt safe enough to pursue connection beyond their strange friendship. "That's good," he managed, meaning it despite the twisting in his gut. "You deserve someone uncomplicated who can show up consistently without wondering if federal investigators are watching." The words came out steady, even though they cost him something to speak. "I wanted you to know because I'm not sure what we are," Athena continued, her honesty characteristically direct. "You've been the most important person in my life besides Kylie this past year, but I don't know if that's gratitude or something else, and I don't know what's possible given who you are and the world you operate in. I just know I care about you and Sophia, and whatever this is between us has been the safest emotional space I've had in years." The confession laid bare her confusion, her need to define something that resisted easy categorization. Frederick turned to face her fully, aware of their daughters still happily occupied with baggage identification, aware of Marco maintaining discreet perimeter security, aware that what he said next would shape the trajectory of something that had started with a lost child's question and grown into something he couldn't imagine living without. "I care about you too," he said simply, the admission feeling simultaneously insufficient and enormous. "And I don't have easy answers about what that means or what's possible. But I do know that you've made me want to be someone who deserves the way Kylie looks at me, like I'm a good man despite knowing I'm dangerous." Athena's eyes glistened with emotion she didn't try to hide, her hand reaching out to touch his arm briefly before falling away. "Maybe we don't need to define it right now. Maybe it's enough that we keep showing up for each other, keep letting our daughters be friends, keep choosing connection even when it's complicated." The suggestion offered a middle path between commitment and nothing, allowing their relationship to exist in undefined space while real life continued happening around them. "I'd like that," Frederick agreed, feeling tension he hadn't known he was carrying release from his shoulders. "Keep showing up, keep choosing connection, keep letting Kylie ask me if I'm still lost." The reference to their beginning made Athena smile, that particular expression that transformed her face from pretty to beautiful, exhaustion and wariness temporarily erased by genuine happiness. Kylie and Sophia suddenly shouted in unison, having spotted their suitcases emerging on the carousel. They worked together to drag the bags off the moving belt, with more enthusiasm than efficiency, both girls giggling as they struggled with luggage larger than they were. Frederick and Athena moved to help, becoming a unit of 4 people working together on the mundane task of collecting belongings, looking for all the world like a normal family doing normal things after a normal flight. They walked together toward the parking garage where Frederick's car waited, Sophia and Kylie holding hands now, and chattering about aquarium plans and stuffed animals, and whether seahorses counted as fish or horses. The contentment Frederick felt in this moment. Daughters happy, Athena beside him, no immediate crisis requiring tactical response, was something he'd never expected to experience. It felt fragile and precious, and entirely dependent on choices he kept making, to show up, rather than retreat into the isolated safety of his previous existence. "Thank you," Athena said, as they loaded luggage into his trunk, the words simple but carrying weight of everything she meant. "Thank you for not walking away that first day. Thank you for the apartment and the consistent friendship. Thank you for making space in your complicated life for us. Thank you for helping me believe that good men exist even in unexpected forms." "Thank you for asking if I was lost," Frederick replied, the echo of Kylie's question bringing them full circle to where this had started. "Turns out I was, and you helped me find something worth the search." The admission felt like the truest thing he'd said in years. This acknowledgement that a 5-year-old's innocent question had redirected his entire trajectory, had shown him that who you chose to be in small moments mattered more than the empire you built through calculated violence. They drove toward the apartment where Athena and Kylie would stay for this visit, Sophia chattering excitedly about all the places they'd show them over the next few days. Frederick navigated Chicago traffic with Marco following in a separate vehicle, maintaining security protocols that had become second nature. The life he'd built was still dangerous, still complicated, still carried consequences that might eventually catch up to him. But for now, in this moment, he had 2 daughters giggling in his back seat, and a woman beside him who saw both his capacity for violence and his choice for kindness, who believed the second could define him more than the first if he kept choosing it consistently. The future remained uncertain. Athena's potential romance with the stable English teacher, Frederick's continued extraction from criminal operations, the girls growing up, and eventually understanding the complicated truth about Mr. Frederick's business. But uncertainty was different from being lost. Lost meant wandering without direction or purpose. What Frederick felt now was navigation toward something worth reaching, even if the route stayed complicated and the destination kept shifting. Sometimes all it took was one small moment, a question, a choice, a willingness to help someone who needed it, to change everything about where you were heading and who you'd become along the way. Thank you all for following this story. If you've enjoyed it, write in the comments where you're watching from. It means so much to know this story is reaching people around the world. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video. Your support helps me continue creating stories about connection, redemption, and the small moments that change everything. See you in the next one.